Shai, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. As I mentioned to you there in our little preamble, I'm somewhat in awe of your capacity to write with such insightfulness and incisiveness and heart. And I'm really, really intrigued to see where this conversation goes today.
Thank you so much for these kind words. And I'm really delighted and eager to start this conversation with you.
Well, as you're aware, I begin this straight away with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Well, may I choose two questions, please?
As many as you would like.
No, just two questions, because one is really essential and the other emerges from it. But I would say that the question that guides me through life is, first of all, the question itself. And I like very much that your podcast is titled as a question. It is a question, and it is a question that keeps your podcast going. So for me, questions, the very essence of them, the very energy behind the question mark, is what excites me, what thrills me, because it is like the constant tension between the wish to know, the wish to understand, the wish to access life's hidden knowledge, and the infinite ocean of not knowing. There is an unknowable, there is an unknown, and there is the known, and there is a tension between these three that is propelled, that is activated by the question. So for me, questions are like a cosmic force, much more primordial than the question mark that we have in our language. And we should live with these questions, including questions that are essentially unanswerable, because it's not about always answering directly questions in a way that makes us feel content, because I'm quite convinced that our answers are by nature limited, but questions lead us to insight. And therefore, if we live with questions and don't look for relief from the energy of questions, we live a life of insight. So that's the most important thing that I would like to say. And then the question that emerges from it, which is for me the most fundamental, is what it is to be human. This is really my question from early life, and I've always been wondering about that kind of unique experience. And I don't feel that we've really answered it. We have fragmentary answers, but I don't feel that we've ever truly tackled this question. Perhaps nowadays that we have AI, that challenges us in a more urgent way to look um, for clearer definitions, because we don't have aliens around, no extraterrestrials to compare ourselves to. So perhaps we have never felt that kind of urgency. But for me, it's again tension between this tremendous reflective self-consciousness and that kind of biological wrapping or biological package, and this tension between the limited and the unlimited, between the mortal and expanded consciousness, transcendence and biological impulses. So that kind of tension, um, this is my interest. This is my passion in life, and I think I've been answering it in so many ways, and still I don't have a clue.
I honestly just that whole opening was just left me with such a delight. There was something in even just the at the very beginning, just opening with the tension between wanting to know or almost being at the edge of really wanting to know, and then the almost the intimacy of the ocean of unknowing, and knowing I don't want that to collapse either. Can you talk to me about
Yes.
this lovely reflection of just the relief from the tension of the question? Could you just say a little bit more on that?
The fact that we seek that kind of relief.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, I think we humans need certainty. We need this kind of psychological safety, and that kind of psychological safety is also expressed in our wish to have established and final knowledge, that we have a reaction to everything we hear, that we have an established opinion, that we have a crystallized a worldview. And I think this is exactly the reason why, when we are confronted with a question, we feel that kind of existential dread. We are not, we don't feel the joy of holding on to the question, of letting it flower, and loving it, and loving this kind of not knowing. You see, sometimes for me personally, my greatest delight in life, because I live with questions daily, is when a question appears, and then instantly, what I do, the first thing I do is delay this kind of need for instant gratification, telling all these answers, you go away. I'm not interested in any of you. I want to be with that question, as long as it may take, days, weeks, months. So I'm not only happy when I come across an insight. It's not that kind of joy that is fulfilled only when I know, but it's that kind of quest that is for me the meaning of life, what keeps my mind eternally awake. And for me, this state of an awakened mind is aliveness. It's not about knowledge. Actually, knowledge leads to, for me, degeneration of the mind. It leads to this kind of sense of sinking. It's this kind of heaviness, the weight of answers. Uh, and I've published so many books, and I teach. I've taught numerous seminars, and it appears that I have many answers, a lot of knowledge to share. But to be honest, every day I start anew. Every day I start with this sense of perfect not knowing, and this is my foundation in life. So as far as I'm concerned, I have accumulated nothing, and that sense of extraordinary lightness of the mind is the most joyous state. But I think that most people are just they just need that kind of certainty more than they would dare to live in that open and not knowing.
You know, it's very interesting you use the words lightness and aliveness, because that's even just in listening to you, that's almost what I'm feeling in this conversation, in just hearing how you're describing this. From just when you mentioned that this question, then, like, what is it to be human, emerged for you? Can you give me a sense of, it's not, I'm not looking for exactly when I was 5 years and 3 months old or something, but when do you get a sense that you started to journey a little bit or explore with this question for you?
Well, I can be very personal about this question. First of all, it's perhaps interesting to share that um, really, ever since I can remember myself, I've been uh, troubled by the question of the meaning of life. Even when I was just, I think it was 11 years old or something like that, I remember myself vividly sitting in the room, writing essays about the meaning of life without understanding what I was writing. I have no idea what what I wrote at that time, but it seems like this question was there, even somewhat in an unconscious way. But I would say that for me, from early childhood, I've always experienced myself as an observer, a distant observer, and as if I watch life, I watch the human experience, and I have this kind of distance. I cannot really find myself drowning in the stream of life's experiences and forget that kind of observer, leave it behind. And I think that that kind of state is actually how many philosophers and many mystics have started their lives, because it's that kind of sense that we are engaged in life, but we are not fully one with life. And this kind of distance is exactly that fascinating space where mysticism and philosophy begins, because it's um, making use of our reflective self-consciousness to step back and wonder about what it is all about. Being able to not only be human, but to ask myself what it is to be human. So this is where it all started. It was completely undeveloped. It was unconscious. It was naive. It was just an existential state. And eventually, when I was somewhere at the age of 21, it all just burst forth uncontrollably, transforming into a philosophical and mystical way of life.
This sense of a distance between you and life, I just find there's something. It's funny, the word distance might almost create the idea of separation, but it definitely creates a sense of intimacy and the observation of it as well. Can you describe just how that experience of distance was, or how did you become to, I guess, even know it or characterize it as distance, if you get me?
Um, yes. Well, I think first of all, it is essential because it's very important to understand. We all have it. We just don't call it that way, and often this kind of capacity that is probably the most human thing about us is what makes us is used wrongly in ways that turn eventually into this kind of self-perpetuating thought, or a thought chasing after its tail, and over exaggerated self-consciousness, all that kind of, or self-introspection, and questioning myself. All that is actually they are symptoms of not knowing how to use that kind of reflective self-consciousness. So for me, just I think I felt a little bit like an alien. So I didn't know exactly what to do with it. And I think that I was observing my emotions, observing my reactions, observing my physical body, and observing my relationships. And one day, I think it was more or less when my spiritual quest began. I told a friend, uh, I feel sometimes as if I'm an actor participating in a play, and she got so offended because she she felt that I was insinuating that our relationship was also a kind of play. You see, something that I was participating in, but without a full identification. But this was the point. And I think that, again, this this distance, as you say so beautifully, it appears to be a detachment or disconnection, but it's our condition. We are always aware of our experiences. We're always aware of ourselves, our names, our forms, our mortality. And that can be the greatest curse and the greatest blessing. Depends how we intend to use it. Albert Camus once said, he wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus something so beautiful. I don't remember it exactly, so I'm going to paraphrase that. He said, if I were a tree or a cat, I wouldn't experience that distance from the world.
Hmm.
And he meant that this was, for him, this was, of course, the beginning of the experience of the absurd, that life is absurd because we have this kind of distance that makes us feel also this kind of strangeness, detachment from the universe, although it's obvious that we are the universe. What else can we be? And it's obvious that we are life. What else can we be? And still we have that kind of distance, and it can develop into absurdity, or it can develop into liberation, mystical liberation, or wonderful philosophical reflection, the kind I strive to share constantly through the writings.
For you, I love this expression or this sentiment of almost observing life and not kind of drowning in the in the currents of life, or just not getting totally sucked into the. I don't want to say even the what I'm sensing is like almost like the personal nature of it, but holding a bigger picture of possibility that it makes it very hard to locate yourself in one particular position. It almost sounds for you. How how did you was that something that felt like what that felt like comfortable for you? Is that like does that how do you still how's your experience, I guess, with the emotions of life and the fullness of life, I guess. And I'm not there's no assumption in that question that there's a disconnection. I sense it allows people to see or feel life more fully. But just from your perspective, how would you kind of describe that?
By the way, I'm reminded of the philosopher, the American philosopher Thomas Nagel, who coined this kind of experience so beautifully, so geniusly. He called that the view from nowhere.
Right.
The view from nowhere. It's as if we have that kind of strange ability. He claimed that this was one of the most interesting characteristics about being human, that we have this capacity to all of a sudden step back and wonder about our life. Now, of course, this creates this kind of strange thing because, for instance, we observe ourselves trapped in programming, and also unable to release ourselves from it. So we obey some routine, we obey some kind of conditioning, and we also observe that we are unable to be free from it. And still, that view from nowhere is free from it. It's transcendent by nature. So that is a very peculiar experience. Now, you're asking whether I felt comfortable with it. I think that it was only when I embarked on the spiritual journey at the age of 21, and I got in touch with texts written by mystics, that I finally was able to give words to that kind of experience, locate it in a healthy evolution of the mind and the spirit, and begin to understand what I am supposed to do with that experience. And it was the very opposite of shrinking it. It wasn't about. Uh, it wasn't that something was wrong with me. It was that I just didn't look back into that kind of capacity to expand it. And the bridge to that kind of expansion is also a question. And that question is, who am I?
I think there's something that you said though that was really important in terms of that capacity to view life, and I will say from nowhere, that it doesn't evolve into this self-questioning from the point of view of like belittling or being disturbed by our human experience. There's something about the way you're describing that perspective that I think allows us to look more clearly at ourselves and to be potentially more transparent with ourselves, about ourselves, or about our experience of life, I guess. In the sense of, I think often when questions, and I think it's very much tied to the way you describe your relationship with questions, there's almost like a desperation, a grasping, a seeking, as you say, almost the relief from that tension. But when someone's looking at their life from this perspective, not all, like there's multiple multiple fluctuations, I'm sure, in the perspective of anyone in life, but with that as a potential position, I think it offers so much more lightness to our inquiry.
Precisely. Yes. You see, this kind of this distance is exactly as you so uh, wonderfully put it. This is exactly where we begin to ask questions. Questions arise exactly in this distance because they come from our reflective self-consciousness. This ability to step back causes us to wonder about what it is that we're experiencing, why we're experiencing it, who is experiencing it, and is there a point in doing all that? So now this, because sometimes again, this can also be an absurd experience because you step back and you think, what am I doing? What is all this trouble? Why am I? Life is so ridiculous, so senseless. So that is another way to ask what is the meaning of life. We sometimes it's another expression of that question. So the only thing is what we do with this space, because this space is unavoidable unless you reduce yourself to a mere experience, which means that you reduce yourself to just a form, human form, biological form, experiencing life, which is possible to a very high degree, to minimize, reduce our reflective self-consciousness. But if we're sensitive, if we're attentive, we cannot avoid that kind of gap, and sometimes it's also widening. And then the whole question is whether we are going to begin to love that questioning space, and understand that to be a human is to be a questioner, is to be someone who lives with questions. And one of these questions is, of course, what is the point in doing all that? Is that meaningful? Is that leading anywhere? So this is, by the way, one example of an unanswerable question.
Yeah.
It's a question that is supposed to help us hone our understanding of meaning, how we understand meaning, deepen our meaningful relationship with life. But in itself, of course, it's not an unanswerable question.
I do want to ask you just about what was kind of leading, and obviously just everything you've mentioned so far, even exploring some of these questions at a younger age, it's not surprising that there was a spiritual journey to embark upon here. But before I even get to that, I'd just love to, when did you when did it become kind of comfortable for you, or to address life with such kind of playful descriptions as ludicrous or absurd? I think that there's like there's something wonderful about the absurdity of life. And when people start using that word, I think that it's an invitation to not unburden ourselves, but just to bring a little bit of play into this curiosity. I just wondering from your perspective, viewing life as somewhat absurd, when did this start to sort of materialize for yourself?
Viewing life as absurd, well, and when it became comfortable for me. Um, well, I think that came as a result of my encounter with Albert Camus, with the myth of Sisyphus, because I think that it was when I did my master's degree research, and I delved into absurdity. And I think that it was the first time when I started realizing that absurdity is half of the reality of life, is 50%. So it's so unavoidable that we somehow have to live with it. I think if we make it a 100% experience of life, then we, like Camus, like Nietzsche, we eventually um, live in a world that is absurd, live in a world that from which there is no escape and no transcendence is possible. And I don't see that, because I still believe that in my experience, in my understanding, that there is this kind of self-transcending capacity, which means going beyond um, the life that is inherently limited. So, but when I started learning Camus deeply, I came to realize that it's the very it's just one experience, mysticism and absurdity. It's just that these two are two approaches to the very same experience. That kind of distance from life, our ability to be mortal, but also think about the time after our death, for instance. And then, of course, dread it greatly, because then we start trying to imagine what it's like to when thought is gone, when we have no longer self-reflection. So that is an example of reflective self-consciousness. Now, for the absurdist philosopher, that means um, feeling that kind of inescapable absurdity. So you have to live that. You have to somehow embrace that, and you have to make sense of it. Just as Camus described this kind of constant climb of Sisyphus up the mountain, and then the rock must uh, roll down. Then you have to push it back again to the top of the mountain, then again, and somehow for Camus this was a source of happiness. At the end of his thought experiment, he believed that that could be still lived in a state of happiness. Well, but the fact that it is absurd is true. It's real. We have that kind of dimension of life in which, because we really don't have access to the meaning of life. And as Thomas Nagel said, we sometimes think if we did have a sense of the meaning of life, then everything would have been resolved. But then he said, imagine giant beings coming to Earth and telling us all, now we're going to tell you what the meaning of life is all about. The meaning of life is for you to be eaten by us. We are actually growing you so that at the end we will be able to consume all of you. Then he said, if we had that kind of absolute definitive answer, would we be satisfied with that? So it's not that we even if we had access to it, it might not resolve that kind of question or that kind of dissatisfaction of absurdist experience. So in reality, we are this kind of being, mystical or not, that lives life with utmost sincerity and seriousness, all only to eventually end it with left with nothing. You see, so that is absurdity. All that effort, we conduct this interview with such earnestness, and we think about these things so deeply, but there is a limit to that kind of meaningfulness that we can derive from it, because of that life is limited. On the other hand, the other 50% is mysticism. It's where you look at that reflective self-consciousness, and you know that if you let it expand, it it becomes so blissfully universal, and you can experience oneness with life. You can experience oneness with the universe. The universe is not a stranger. It's there is a way out of that kind of absurdity, that, and it is relieved by this sense of absolute intimacy with life. And this life is gorgeous, just as it is absurd. Somehow we need to embrace it both, because of that gift that is a curse, the reflective self-consciousness.
You've kind of got me wrapped up in kind of beautiful paradoxes right now, which are they're immensely satisfying. And also, I must say, I had the temptation to end the interview there after you said how absurd the earnestness in which we're conducting this is. Um,
Oh yes. Yes, I was pushing the.
it's so true. Like, but it's perfectly true. Like, even the my inquiries sometimes will have me feeling on the cusp of something so um I don't know, almost taking it seriously, and then almost having to laugh at the seriousness, but but enjoy that too as an expression of that, inquiry sometimes as well. Like, so yeah, that was just gorgeous to listen to be honest. Like, it just kind of just moves, like there's a lovely to and fro to it. Like, there's a lovely just movement and accepting of both elements, and I guess experiencing something different within that. Just out of
Yes.
interest, the movement for you into this, let's say, spiritual inquiry then in your early 20s. Just curious as to what prompted that for you, or was there a moment that kind of ignited that, or was this a general movement that was just occurring?
I think it was a combination, because there was some awareness of all kinds of psychological limitations. I remember very very vividly how I sat with a friend, and it was a close friend, and I sat, and I was so anxious while we were communicating, and my legs were frozen. And I remember so strongly how I looked at that experience while we were talking, and I thought, why would I have to experience that? We are so intimate right now. Everything is flowing so nicely, and still I'm so excessively self-conscious of every movement, everything I say. And that kind of discomfort, this feeling of being trapped in excessive self-consciousness, was one very strong incentive. But really, I think um, we always have some excuse for our spiritual journey, that we can some mostly we can trace our spiritual longing back to some kind of suffering or confusion or crisis. But I think that it's just it was just there, that question. And then I remember when I started reading, it was Zen koans, Zen riddles, and haiku, and I read it, and something surged in me. It was like a gushing, a longing to reality, and a sense of some clarity that I had never managed to contact through all my intellectual pursuit, because back then I had planned to be a novelist and a journalist, and that was also my occupation at that time. And and I and then I one time as a journalist, as a book reviewer, I received a book by Osho, a book on meditation, and I will never forget that night. I sat there reading his descriptions of some meditations, and how you can make your being a prayer, and it just exploded at that moment, because I felt something that was um, so tangible, and so and the touch of the sacred, and nothing. When I uh, came to the university, when I enrolled, it was when I was 21, and I was really hoping that my philosophy professors would know something about the meaning of life. That was, I was really naively registering to the university, hoping that this would be the case. And I sat in front of them, and there were teachers in Buddhism and East South Asian thought, and and linguistics and philosophy in general. And I looked at them, and they were reading from paper. They were not even looking at us, and they had no idea about anything. They just were vehicles of information that they called knowledge, that I hoped would be wisdom. See? And then when reading Osho, it was such naked truth. It had uh, the it showed me that my existential state could be an answer. That being something, being in a certain state, that could be an answer, and that it didn't have to be framed intellectually or conceptually. So that was the beginning. This led me to India, and then the more dramatic unfolding of the journey.
There's so many phrases that you're using there that are just, I'd love to just sit with for minutes at a time instead of coming up, or let alone responding to it. But that general sentiment, though, of the your being, being a like being a like you're the kind of the experience of your being a response almost to these questions, that didn't seek to intellectualize or didn't seek to answer. And this lovely sentiment of a realization of a longing for reality. Can you just, that expression even of longing for reality, it feels very different from someone grasping for an answer or an intellectual answer to a question. Um, how would you even describe that sense of longing for reality?
That's a beautiful question. I think longing for reality is, first of all, it is something. If I may use the term, it's something that emerges from the heart. That is, it is not. It is more like a sort of remembrance. It's something that it's not. Longing is not for something that we don't have yet, or that we haven't reached. Longing is can, as Plato said, actually, is something that you can only long for because you remember that you once had it, that you once were it. So that is a very essential point, and it's interesting that it was formulated by a philosopher who was also partly a mystic. Well, longing, I would say, is for a reality that is not fabricated by thought. That cannot be something that you can contain conceptually. That yourself, with all its conditioned responses, simply cannot contain it. That there is something that the I is contained by, rather than contain it. You see, it's not something that you can have. Reality must be something that is greater than your thoughts, greater than your emotions, greater even than your experiences, your greatest, deepest experiences. So, but I think that there's also this intuitive understanding that reality that is longed for uh, cannot be understood. It is not something to comprehend. It is something to merge into. So so if we started our conversation with the essence of questions, that would mean that the question doesn't lead to an answer, not even to an insight, but to the dissolution of the questioner. So it's almost like a destructive or negative question that turns against you, that turns against your own curiosity, your own wish to understand, and shows you that the only reason that you don't understand it is that you stand in the way, that you as a thinking process is you are the veil, you are the hindrance. So then you have to somehow step aside, and then reality unmediated recognizes itself. That is the point, because there is this reflective self-consciousness. I only think that it is usurped, it is taken over by some kind of some egotistical, self-centered creature that doesn't exist and wants reality and life for itself. And that's the whole point. So it wants to, so it sucks the life force, or and also this kind of remarkable consciousness. It consumes it, and this is how it uh, creates an appearance of reality. The self, Shai, for instance, whereas Shai is just a passing cloud in the vast sky of reality. So the cloud is not the reality. It cannot be. It is. If it is real for a moment, it is because it passes through the vast sky of reality. So then, this is the moment when the cloud begins to contemplate, and because the cloud is somewhat made of the sky, it also has the essence of the sky. So it can contemplate, and it can also um, have this kind of sense of oneness with the sky and the consciousness of the sky, so that when it finally dissolves into the vast sky, it has no fear but only bliss. And I think that is the end of absurdity, you see. Because
I don't want to fall into the temptation of um either that reality or that oneness with life itself, or that transcendence almost being the antidote to this absurdity. um I'd say, just from my own experience, for wherever I am, or whatever I am, if you know what I mean, not looking to categorize or stick myself in a position. There's something about the fleeting nature of those realizations that just allows me to look at life with a little bit of a glint in my eye, or a little bit of a smile at the absurdity, rather than getting consumed by the absurdity.
ah,
There's There's something about it where it's not. I don't know if my even trajectory or hope is even for a sense of transcendence. It's just even just to experience these different, to have an experience of these things. Just really intrigued for you as to when did that journey for you, when did you realize almost the limitations of that experience of absurdity and the role maybe of transcendence, beyond that experience? When did that become more of a curiosity, I guess, for yourself?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate what you just said. I don't think, first of all, I don't think that we can eliminate absurdity completely. It is not possible. It is also it would be wrong of us to attempt to do so. I think it is absurdity is a part of the experience that needs to be embraced. And this is also, I think, why I remain a philosopher and never only a mystic, and why I remain a mystic and never only a philosopher. You see,
Yeah, yeah,
because and not because they somehow balance one another. It's not a therapeutic occupation or strategy. It is more because I think they really complete each other in terms of what reflective self-consciousness can do and be. Um, because philosophy, for instance, would always like to preserve all the questions. It would always want to preserve that kind of distance, this kind of wandering aspect, this kind of contemplative distance from the truth, from reality. It's not philosophy is not about merging. On the other hand, there's mysticism, which aims to abolish all questions. It leads to a kind of state beyond questions, beyond answers. It's where there are no longer questions, no longer answers. It transcends both, the very pursuit. And I think that both need to be preserved and honored as our precious capacities, as what um, as the potential of our consciousness. So now you ask when I started finding this kind of, you can say, not the end of absurdity, but a significant reduction of the experience, and that and that was, I think, when I was 23. And at a certain point, it was in a spontaneous. It was also, by the way, an answer to. It came as a response to a question because I sat somewhere and I just naively looked into myself, and I thought, "Who am I? Who is the observer of that experience right now?" And then there was that kind of. It was almost like like a collision with reality. There was this sense that there was this ability to look into that thing that I call self and see that it was just a bundle of memories and past experiences glued together by some kind of self-image, a picture in my head, and that seeing simply dismantled, unraveled this bundle. And at that very moment, there was this kind of expansion of consciousness. Consciousness was no longer centered around a certain self, but it was everywhere. So that kind of omnipresence of consciousness, is what we can call one thing that could free us from this sense of absurdity. Because when you have that kind of perfect intimacy with life, you're no longer a stranger. And when you're
hmm.
no longer a stranger, and you are filled with love, and essential love, not love for something, and bliss, not because something wonderful happened to you. And that kind of state is in itself an answer. You see, it's you have no idea what the meaning of life is. Even after that, it's you cannot form a religion based on that. But all you know is that you are made of the universe, and the universe contains you, and that there is a sense that is far greater than you, that you are able to tap into, you are able to access, and that has that kind of revelation has ever since been my guiding light, both in philosophy, including absurdist philosophy, and my spiritual life.
It sounds like you very much took those words from Osho very seriously about make your being a prayer. And the the sentiment you mentioned briefly, just even around the energy that tries to almost life draining energy that almost tries to convince ourselves that it's real, um, as part of the human experience. Just curious as to where do you, when you ask that initial question of what is it to be human, where do you sense that energy, what part does that play in all of this? Like in I know that you're talking about a oneness, potentially an experience of transcendence and absurdity with life as well, and yet I don't know what it is, because I don't sense it as to be so present at all. Once even moments of a oneness have been experienced, and I'm not even talking about a oneness even in some you know state where people might eulogize and suggest. I even just mean like a oneness in a intimacy of a relationship, in a, just as you put it there, just in terms of not feeling like a stranger in this life. That energy seems to be so less prevalent. Where do you sense that energy sits within the context of your understanding, in exploring that question of what is it to be human?
Just to make sure that I'm answering the right question, what do you mean by energy? By this energy, what do you mean by?
So just when you were alluding to, like earlier, it just sounded like even alluding to the ego as such.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
If I understood that correctly,
Yes.
and if I didn't, you can just scratch the, you can just answer it whatever way you want to, I guess.
So I would say, so I guess that you mean that this kind of ego sense of separate self, right?
Yeah.
That again, that is quite unavoidable. Um, well, and how this is somehow connected to what it is to be human. Well, I think that a great deal of our of human suffering is because it is caused by the fact that we experience. Of course, I'm talking about existential suffering. I'm not talking about suffering as a result of wars, as a result of famine, as a result of injustice. There are many kinds of suffering in the world, but existential suffering, the psychological suffering, let's put it this way, is the fact that we experience ourselves so as such personal beings. We have this sense of of personalized existence. Life is my own. I exist for myself. The very framing of my life is as a personal experience. Now that also only aggravates the sense of absurdity, because if it is personal, then it is also, since we're mortal, that means that kind of experience is has is questionably meaningful, because it is not something that is um, that is that is has this kind of absolute sense of existence. It is relative, it is transient. And then I think that when we begin to think of our life as a part of something that is more universal, that is more cosmic, then and about to think of our identity as something that is beyond the person, we begin to have this kind of a greater sense of, or greater story of which we are part. By the way, this doesn't have to be so mystical. I just recently interviewed for Big Think 5 scientists. For me, this was exhilarating. This project, because I could with them I could discover um, this option of having this very same grand feeling of universality, of being part of a greater story, simply by contemplating on the discoveries of cosmology, astronomy, and physics. So we can even derive that very sense of universality, belonging to something that is bigger than us, belonging to the universe, not just from mystical transcendence. Even the universe whispers that very same story of, you are not only a personal, isolated being. You, for cosmologists, it's looking at the stars, realizing that we came from the stars, and now the stars somehow developed reflective self-consciousness to be able to contemplate them. You see, so there's a kind of circularity in the universe that creates an extraordinary sense of intimacy. So that is, for me, this is how it is related to what it is to be human, because as long as we just think in this kind of stifling, personalized version of our story, I feel that we doom ourselves to a great deal of psychological suffering, because we don't have this kind of breadth and a space within our consciousness. Our consciousness is destined to act as the conscious extension of the universe itself. This is how I experience why I have a mind.
Yeah. But by the way, in that article you're referring to, there was I think one of the scientists referred to the idea of, or taking the perspective that we're not looking up at the stars, we're looking down at the stars, and it's the Milky Way is cradling us. If I
Exactly.
heard, if I read that correctly, and there was just
Exactly.
something utterly gorgeous about reading that as just a contemplation. And just to echo what you're saying as well, like I have a layman's interest in reading quantum physics, and I
Ah,
don't think I have some quantum physicist friends who I have conversations with around what I think I understand. And a lot of times, even when I'm reading or I'm hearing, I don't feel I intellectually understand per se what's happening, but I feel it very deeply. And there's
ah,
something, I think there is kind of something mesmeric about the exploration into that, and not solely through a kind of an intellectual, solely an intellectual lens. Shai,
yes, yes, yes.
I'm just looking at the time, and looking, I guess, at some of my notes of one liners that I've scribbled down, and usually I like to try to do some recap of the conversation at this point. And I'm aware that even when I listen back to this, I think there'll be a number of things that I'll just stop and pause and sit with for longer than I had the chance to in this conversation. But just moving from the start of the conversation, just to even acknowledge the significance of questions and the relationship with questions, and not kind of giving into that tension, that absolute tension, but being almost comfortable or inviting or loving of that. That the idea that there's a kind of an intimate, or there's an infinite ocean of not knowing, and it's it's somewhat to be at peace with that, while there can be different oscillations within that. Then this question that emerged for you around what is it to be human, and just how that evolved for you, even at a younger age, writing essays and not knowing what that was about, an appreciation or a noticing of a distance between yourself and life, or a feeling of yourself as being an observer of life, and not necessarily being something that, well, it made more sense in your spiritual inquiries, but just something that there was an aliveness that came with that, and it also a sense of it shifting from just looking for information and knowledge almost being this weightiness or this heaviness, and this beautiful interplay that you described between the absurdity of life, and then almost from a from a philosophical point of view, and just then this oneness of life that's also a part of your, like, almost this kind of mystical makeup or interpretation or experience of life, and some just beautiful notions around let your being be a prayer, a oneness of life, a longing for reality. So many gorgeous kind of touchings to something beyond life, and just this mental interpretation of it, but more of a fullness of it, while not looking for one to eliminate the other, but to embrace both. And almost that seems to me, anyway, from my experience, a big part of what it is to be human. And then just more recently, just this acknowledgement of when we own this life so much or fixate so much on it as I am the center of it, and we don't have that capacity to realize the consciousness that's beyond that, that the maybe the interconnectivity of things, just the significance of this life, and how we may just be a passing cloud within it. And there's something even within that can just, for me anyway, I won't put words in your mouth, but just rest a little easier in the experience of what it is to be human. I'm really curious to ask you, Shai, the question of what is a good life for you.
That's why I must say that this was much more than a recap. It was like rearranging everything that we've said in such a touching way, such a, a palpable way. So thank you for that. What is a good life for me? Well, in the spirit of course, this can be answered in many different ways, and in based on many different moods. but but I would say that um, Plato Socrates said famously said that it is the unexamined life that is not worth living, and that of course implies that the examined life is worth living. And for me, it's life in which we make maximal use, and of course not in a state of in a neurotic state by a sense, but in a ecstatic sense, make maximal use of our gift of reflective self-consciousness. The fact that we can reflect is a gift, and we're not here to just be alive and to go through life's stream of experiences without uh, uh, self, without reflective self-consciousness. I know that this is very often annoying, because we don't know how to carry this kind of constant observer with us. But if we learn how to make use of it, and we understand that to be human is to live in this strange blend, somewhat absurdist blend of reflective self-consciousness and biological system, and this kind of stream of experiences, then we are able to begin to exercise this kind of ability to ask questions, to be in awe, to expand our consciousness, to think very deeply, to serve as a conscious extension of the universe. Um, for me, this this kind of life is an awakened life. It's emotionally awakened, it's intellectually awakened, it is spiritually awakened. It means that I get to both experience life with total involvement, and still I have this kind of capacity that only deepens ultimately my ability and my fearlessness, because with consciousness comes also this kind of uh, fearless engagement. So this is much of what I do in life, actually. I think I've joyfully dedicated myself to encouraging people to exercise that reflective self-consciousness and realize for themselves how ecstatic it is and how they feel much more alive when they do so.
That's an utterly gorgeous answer, and throughout this conversation, the feeling I touched on it earlier of aliveness, just a really palpable sense of almost ecstatic curiosity, exploration, wondering, oneness. It just made this whole conversation for me an absolute joy. So, Shai, thank you so much for joining us today on the What Is a Good Life podcast, and I really look forward to continuing to follow your work.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight, because that was such a profound kind of questioning, and how could one ever resist that kind of ecstasy, and especially when it is shared. Thank you.